Welcome to Tina Talks, where time is not a healer, but we believe that we all have the power to heal ourselves and take our mental well-being into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of Tina, the mental wellbeing marketplace and community platform at timeisnotahealer.com, providing you with the best products for your self-healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want support on your mental wellbeing journey. We're your hosts, Sophie and Kelsey, and today's episode we are talking to Kelsey, who is the COO of Tina. And we are going to deep dive into her experience within mental health. We have been started to do these episodes where we are interviewing people. So far it's been each other, to get a real feel of like people's experiences with mental health, because obviously one of our ideas here with Tina is to destigmatize the conversation. We know that it's a really tough topic for people to talk about, and we want to help make people feel like they are not alone in going through the things that they're experiencing, and understand that no healing journey is linear and everybody's journey looks different. So by doing these conversations, we're hoping to open up the conversation and make you feel more comfortable talking about your own mental health and seeking help as and where it's required. So today we're talking to Kelsey. So Kelsey, I don't know if you want to kick off by talking us through your experience within mental health and the time that you kind of first started to realize that maybe there was something that was you were finding difficult.
Yeah, sure. So, gosh, okay, let's see. I'm currently 32, and I would say, like, I had two different introductions to mental health and wellness. I got introduced to psychology on more of like an educational standpoint when I was a sophomore in college. And my very first psych class wasn't the traditional Psych 101. It was actually in Spain. It was in Spanish, and it was called The Psychology of Learning a Second Language. And I fell in love. I loved it. I really liked the aspect behind the science behind how our brain worked and how we process things and how that affect us psychology wise. And that's when I decided, okay, I want to take some more psychology courses. So I had to have been about, I think, 19 when that happened. And then I took my first psychology 101, where it starts to go into different psychological disorders and mental health issues and all of that. And when I was sitting in my class, I was like, oh, so and so in my family has bipolar disorder. Oh, so and so in my family has anxiety and depression. Oh, that makes it like it all kind of like I didn't have names or labels for the things until I took that course. And I realized there's a lot of people in my family who have really struggled with mental health. And that has been like, and I'm talking my core family and the experiences that I've had with, behavioral disorders and things like that. And then I didn't really tune into what like any mental health experience until I would say I was 20. So this had to have been, I graduated college in 2013, and I was experiencing things but at the time I wouldn't have labeled it as anything. I wouldn't have been like, oh, this is a thing. But I definitely had anxiety. And according to my doctors, I probably had like moderate depression for most of my life. But I didn't really know that's what was happening. I had graduated, and then I was 2013, and about a little less than a year later, my dad got really, really sick. He had end stage liver failure from drinking. He struggled with alcoholism. And I also had experiences with my mom, who also struggled with alcoholism, and experiences where, I really had to set boundaries with both of them to sort of protect myself. And I went to school in another state. And so I still had a relationship with both of them, but I really put limits. But when I would have interactions with them, a lot of the time it would end in tears or like anxious states, things like that. But it wasn't until my dad was really sick. I had gotten a big girl job. I actually started working in an inpatient psychiatry unit. And I was trained on the unit. And so I had a lot of education, right? I continued to go on to study psychology. I knew a lot of things in psychology terms, and I got training on how to manage things with mental health issues. And I was new to the job, and my dad, he was very, very sick, and I didn't know how sick he was because he hid it for a really long time. And there's a lot of frustration coming up with dealing with him and certain issues with my mom. And so I decided to go to therapy. I went back to therapy. I'd been in therapy when I was younger, but a lot of the time it wasn't necessarily because I needed therapy. It was because like something was happening in my family, and it was like, okay, we're going to do as a family, we're all going to therapy, even though we weren't in sessions together. Um, and I had my preconceived notions about therapists because my parents had a really nasty divorce, and I spoke to therapists, but it was mainly for court appointed reasons. And like, it wasn't to help me, or at least that's how I felt. It was for them to get information out of me and then go and use that in court. That's pretty much what was happening. So, for a long time, I was like, fuck therapy. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. But then I got into the field and I learned a lot of things. And when my dad was really sick, I started to go back to therapy because I started having anxiety attacks. And I've said this in other episodes, but I have a very distinct memory where I remember being so mad. I'd done it. I'd gotten out of the crappy environment. I had a lot of trauma in my upbringing. I survived it, right? And when you're surviving, you're just surviving. You don't really know. That's why I didn't know, oh, I was depressed. Oh, I was anxious, because I was surviving it, and I was surviving it for a very long period of time. But I like went to college and I graduated. I did a great job. I got the big girl job. I was, could afford to live on my own, all those things. I mean, I lived with roommates, but like I was doing well for myself. And then all this was happening with my dad, and I started having anxiety attacks. They weren't necessarily panic attacks for me. And I went to therapy, and I was like, what is happening? I'm pissed. I am having anxiety attacks. I understand this is a stressful situation, but I like know I, coped with these things for a long time, but I feel like I'm finally free of stuff. And now I'm like sad. I can't get off of the couch. Like, I would work and then I would just binge watch Netflix all the time. And I was really sinking into a depression. And my therapist, this is when I learned that lesson, was like, oh yeah, so when you're in it and you're surviving, you can't process any of the things that are happening to you. You can't, really fully go through the emotions and understand and break it down. Once you are out of survival mode and you are in a safe situation, that is when your brain and body starts to break things down and process it. And so that's when you start to experience things like intense depression and anxiety. And I was so mad. I was like, this is bullshit. I survived all these things all these years, and I just want to like live a regular life. And now I have to deal with this. And I was diagnosed with moderate depression. And then this was when I had like a big breakdown and this was all in a very short period of time. My dad, so I graduated in 2013, started probably seeing a therapist early 2014. And then my dad passed in 2015. And I was like I was the POA. So I had the power of attorney to like help make decisions, and it was not pretty. And there was just a lot of stuff that happened in the hospital with his body shutting down. And after he passed, I started having intrusive suicidal thoughts. So I went into like a super deep depression. I noticed, because I was in the field, I recognized all the signs. Like, I knew what was happening as it was happening, and I couldn't stop it. But logically, I also knew, like, I don't want to die. Like, I'm not like, it's not this internal feeling of I really want to no longer exist. It's just, I think I was overloaded with experiences and emotions. And typically being around people was really helpful for me. But like, I noticed, like at work, I'd have to excuse myself to leave the unit to go and like have a little breakdown and then come back to it. And I was starting to struggle to be around people. And then I was having these intrusive suicidal thoughts of like hurting myself, but it's not what I didn't want to act on it. And I can imagine for people who don't have my training and background, having that experience is incredibly scary. It was scary enough for me, and I understood what was happening. And I cued my partner at the time. I cued him on everything that was happening, and my therapist. And then finally we decided to go see a doctor so that I could get on an antidepressant. I'm a lucky person in that antidepressants, the first try doesn't work for everybody. It's a lot of trial and error to see what med works for you. But the first try did work for me. I am very sensitive to meds, so it messed up my stomach. I was sick. I was like physically ill for a while. But I've, those old school commercials where that like dark cloud that's following you around finally clears and lifts off your shoulders is literally what it felt like for me. And I felt like, oh, I could finally breathe again. So that's a very long-winded answer to like my experience with mental health and how I started to realize I was struggling with things and realizing, oh, I do have general anxiety disorder and I have had major depressive episodes. And I've had even, with that, I've tagged on, thoughts of intrusive thoughts and things like that. So that was my hello to mental health in my own personal experience.
That's a very good idea of like exactly the symptoms that were presenting for you as well, of like what was actually coming up for you at the time that you were going through it. And thanks for sharing that in so much detail, because there's a lot of like traumatic things that you would have had to have gone through in that period of time. I guess when you got to that point where you knew that you didn't want to act on any of the thoughts that you were having, and you were on the antidepressants, for example, what was kind of your next step to getting yourself out of that? Or was that like the at that time in your life, was that what your action point was that it? And or were you doing other things to also kind of start you on like a bit more of a healing, changing habits and behaviors journey?
Yeah. So being that I work in the field, I understand that medication and therapy are not the end all be all. You do have to change your everyday habits and behaviors, and you really have to do the work to change the narratives that are in your head. And therapy was helpful. It was a helpful resource to deal with the heavy emotions that I was dealing with in the moment. And then medication was helpful when I was no longer able to be like functioning in my day to day. Right. And then I was having those like really intrusive thoughts. And so the medication really helped. It kind of like leveled me out. And I just started my job. I remember I was like within the 3-month probation period. So the fact that I had to take time off to like when my dad was in a state over, I'd have to drive 2.5 hours. Like if I got a call, he was in the hospital, that kind of thing. When he passed, like I wanted to take like a week off of work. At the time, the lady who was running the unit, for being a mental health unit, I would say like I was not pleased how it was handled. Like they didn't want to give me the time. They didn't want to give me a week off. And I was like, my dad just died and I had to make all these decisions. Of all people, y'all should know mental health issues. And like, I was not happy about it. And I think I was just looking to get back to ground zero, to be honest. I wasn't trying to push to, I was just trying to cope day by day. Because then it wasn't like, now I was like, my mood was a little bit more stable, but I was dealing with the grief of losing my parents, so that's like on top of depression. Now I'm grieving. And that was really heavy. And so I just kind of was going through the motions, I guess. I was like showing up to work. I was doing what I needed to for work. I knew for me, what would be really helpful is like, I needed to make sure I was getting enough sleep. I needed to make sure that I was moving my body with exercise. And that was something that I struggled with for a really long time. Like, how do I have a consistent exercise routine? So I would like try to get myself to like go to yoga, or I try to get myself to work out at the hospital gym, or, like I would try to do things, but I was just struggling to make it a consistent habit and behavior. And that's ultimately what helps you in the long run, is when it's consistent. So I was just at that point in time, I was still surviving. And because I had the knowledge and the background and the education, I was attempting to do things, but I wasn't really pushing myself excessively. The thing that I really, really wanted was I knew that I really enjoyed my job. I thrived at work. I did really, really well. I have a tendency to throw myself into, what's the word? It's not like I like, 'cause I'm a type A personality. So like the productive things. So I was always like with school, I was a student, like with jobs, I was like a solid worker. And so I kind of threw myself into work with like, trying to take care of myself in the background. I always made sure I got my sleep. I was doing my proper hygiene stuff and trying to work out when I can. And I leaned heavily into like my boyfriend and friends and things like that. And that was really helpful. Um, but I threw myself into work and I thrived and I ended up like, right, I was crushing it. I paid off all of my university debt within 2.5 years and of starting that job. And I knew for me, this was prior to my dad passing and everything. I had an experience in college where I studied abroad. And it was my first like truly detaching experience from my life in the US, and I got to see how other people lived and how they were going about their daily life. And it was all very new and shiny. And I got to just be me in a completely different environment. And so I really caught the travel bug. I really, really wanted to experience more travel. I really wanted to see, you know, what life could be like outside the context of societal demands, the demands of my family, and within reason, right? Being an adult and taking care of myself. It's not like I'm leaving behind a bunch of debt and just up and disappearing. But I knew I wanted to travel. So I was preparing myself to take a break. I was supposed to go on for more schooling in the psych field for clinical. And for me, I knew I needed a true, genuine break. That's like the behavior change, the reset that I needed. And so I paid off my debt. I did the big girl responsible things. I got my 4 years of experience in the field, 6 years actually. But then I planned to travel the world for like a year and a half, 2 years. And I started in Australia. And that is when I would say the real healing for me of like actively changing behaviors and working in myself began. That's what I would say.
I think when you go through a big life change like that, where you're moving countries or you've only lived in one certain way for most of your life, and like I think that is normally a really good starting point, trigger point for people to go on these more like self-development healing journeys, because ultimately what works for you when you're living in Chicago, let's say, versus what's happening in Sydney, Australia is a very, very different scenario, right? So you have to change to adapt to your environment. So I think that often is a really big trigger. And it also allows you perspective on life that you've been living, to understand, is that the way that you want to live, and take you on a journey basically to change it if it's not. So what was one of the first things that you did to make some changes when you landed over in Australia?
I started journaling. That's what I did. So it was really important for me at that time, like just to give a little context to people, a lot of my life was dealing with my parents and their crap. I was like from a very young age, like they split when I was 6. There was abuse happening in the house before that. And then there was abuse that continued after the fact. And so I was like really just surviving. And my dad did really, he really instilled work ethic, and like school was really important. I needed to get straight A's. And so I knew how to, I had to learn how to learn because I wasn't a solid test taker, stuff like that. And I was just really like honed in on, what do I have to do to achieve X, Y, and Z, and then to be safe? How do I manage the things around me? And then I struggled with like making friends. Like I remember when I was younger, just because I had a lot going on in my home life, it was hard for me to connect with other kids. A lot of the time I did have friends. I made friends and that kind of thing. But when I look back on high school, I have only 2 girlfriends now to this date from high school that I've continued to have really solid relationships. And I didn't make those until, I mean, we were friends, but we didn't really connect until our junior year, like in depth. And then college, I look back on college, I have not really that many. I don't have girlfriends that I'm in touch with from college that like were really solid relationships. Like I don't have a solid college community that I look back on and I'm like, that's my group of friends. I was working multiple jobs. I was getting 2 degrees at the same time. Like I was doing stuff. Don't get me wrong. I had friends. I partied. There are people that I know that I appreciate and all that, but it's not like people who I consider like now still my people. Um, and so then when I went on to, get my job at the hospital, those people really became my family. That was my first, like, I developed this community on my own, and it was really important to me that I maintain those relationships. And so a big part for me was I wanted to go somewhere where I didn't know anybody, not where I was meeting people through people, but like I didn't know anybody. And I wanted to see how would I take care of myself on a day-to-day basis, and how could I form deep, intimate relationships just based on who I was. That's what was really important for me. And so I really lean into it. I actually didn't work for like the first month and a half when I was in Australia, which is a bad idea because you spend a lot of money
Australians are fun.
to like, yeah, to like live and enjoy your life there. I had a great time though. Um, it was a very necessary, needed break, but I made some really solid friendships there, and I was able to like really dive deep into myself and who I was and what I liked and what I didn't like just because of what I wanted and what I needed, not because of what other people needed and wanted. Um, I was working random jobs. I did some really random stuff and I just kind of really put myself out of my comfort zone. I did a lot of things I'd never done before. I made some really solid relationships with some ladies, and they too were also working on themselves. So it was a really nice experience to share with them. Um, and I remember one of the things, this was a big one. I worked in bumfuck nowhere, Queensland, Australia. This is part of my it's called your regional work if you wanted to get another visa. And there was no TV, there was no Wi-Fi. And so it was just you in a donga, which is like a industrial container room, and then you would go to work. Granted, where I was working, the manager, he was an alcoholic and he was abusive, so I felt right at home. And so it's like this dude, I didn't tolerate his shit at all. We butted heads a lot, but I was a solid worker. I did things, but it gave me a lot of time to just like read on my off time, which was just in the evenings. We worked 7 days a week, and this went on for 3 months. So I was reading in the evenings, I was reflecting, I was journaling. I was watching some movies that we had saved on like laptops and stuff, and that was a really intensive experience for me, that really helped me learn who I was and what I wanted and how it kind of broke me down a little bit. After that was when I started to transition of, well, what am I going to do next? Now I don't want to go home. I don't necessarily want to stay in Australia, and I'd never thought about continuing on to other places. And then next thing you know, I found myself in Asia. So
Quite hard to leave, as we both know, when you find yourself there. It sounds like there was two things for you then there. Like one was you found a sense of community and that
yeah.
helped you like probably build a lot of like sense of self-worth. And then two, you also had that time, that introspective time when you were on the farm in Australia to really like sit with yourself and understand and like start understanding, I guess, a little bit more about you and what you wanted out of life, really. Would you say that was kind of like the start where you had like, did you have any breakthrough moments? Was that a breakthrough moment for you where you started to understand more about like what you needed to do to help yourself feel better? Or what did that experience from that point look like?
Yeah, I guess like when I was there, it wasn't really breakthrough moments. It was the decompression time that I needed. It was the time that I needed to live life without outside pressure. And like with my journaling, I was exploring some things, but I wasn't necessarily like diving deep into like, narratives and changing this and that. And um I it was just a nice reprieve to be able to just be me and like live life outside of other things. Um, so no breakthrough moments, I would think, in Australia. I did I did have a moment. I did a very classic moment of wrapping up my time in Australia. I had been traveling with two really good girlfriends of mine. We all worked in the regional work together. Then we went and lived in a van and traveled down the East Coast. Um, and then we all went our separate ways. They had partners, they were going meeting up. And so this was the first time in a long time I was on my own again. And I worked on some like island for a little while, and that was a really interesting experience. I really loved it, but had met some not so good people. And then my closing, I was like, you know what, I'm not ready to go. I just picked a place that was a shoulder season. Weather wasn't crap. It wasn't going to go too expensive. And that's how I ended up in Asia, because I was limited on money. So I needed to go somewhere cheap. And before I left Australia, I did a whole reflection journal post about my time in Australia, the things I learned about myself. And I could really see what I had achieved for myself, and like building the intimate relationships with other women in a community, and being on my own and seeing what my personality was like and what I was capable of. And it was really, really refreshing. And it empowered me to continue on this journey, even though I had no clue where I was going. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I just know that I wasn't ready to return home and like go back into big girl, studying for my PhD, stuff like that. I just wasn't in a place for it. Asia was a culture shock for me. I hated it when I first got there. It was very overwhelming. I did not like it. I met some really nice people who took me under their wing, and they were younger than me, and they took me under their wing and really helped me adjust. And it wasn't until I was there that I started to learn things about like breath work. I knew stuff about meditation from my work in the field, but I was at that time working in the hospital. I was like, yeah, meditation, whatever. Like, I can see how it can help people, but it's not for me. And when I got to Indonesia, I I the thing for me, I'm a logical person, and I'm more of like a what's going to help me in a physical sense. I knew that I wanted to get off of my antidepressant, and I knew that the best way to do that was to make sure I had something to fall back to, as in like what's naturally going to kick up my dopamine and my serotonin. Like, how can I regulate that without an antidepressant? So I made it my goal to make sure I got into a fitness rhythm before I was fully weaned off of my antidepressant, because I was on the other side of the world. I couldn't get a refill, and I wanted to be prepared for that. And so I started to do that, and I got into a really regular fitness routine, and that was super helpful. I saw the benefits. I was doing a lot of high intensity interval, which, if I'm being honest, for someone who's had spiked cortisol levels most of her life, I shouldn't have been doing. That's not what I should have been doing, but it felt good. And I was able to get into a rhythm, and I did it consistently, and it was really, really nice. And that was my entryway to building confidence around physical exercise for me and my body. Well, as one would know, when you have really spiked cortisol levels, especially for a very long period of time, it can affect a lot of different things: memory, immune system, other areas. My memory was trash. There's periods of my life I don't remember. My immune system, I would be sick all the time. And I'm talking like really, really sick all the time. And not because I'm like drinking and partying or whatever. I just get sick, and I couldn't like live normal life. And so I'd been exercising, and I wanted to figure out a way how to better manage my immune system. And I wasn't even thinking in terms of mental health. I knew the exercise was for mental health, but for my immune system, I started to learn about breathwork activities. So if anyone's heard about whimhoff breathing, I met a couple of people. This is where, to me, I was like, oh, this is a sign. I met like 3 or 4 different people within a span of a week who were talking about the style of breathing, all separate like pockets of people. And they were talking about the benefits with the immune system and this and that. And I was like, oh, maybe this is something I should give a try. And I got into Wim Hof breathing, and it changed my world. I would say that was my breakthrough moment of, not only after practicing a while, it did really help my immune system and I stopped getting sick. Um, it grounded me. It connected my mind and my body, again, my body and my mind, which often gets disrupted when you experience a lot of trauma and you're experience a lot of anxiety, depression, those things. And it really reconnected me, grounded me within myself. And it started to kind of like clear out a lot of the physical energy I've been holding on to with all the crap in my life. It was a game changer. I'm pretty sure I did whimhoff breathing for a little over a year straight. And it's a bit of an intensive breathing style. And so I started to explore other breathing techniques and what could I get into. Um, and then in that is when I moved from Indonesia to Vietnam, because Bali was great, but it wasn't something for me long-term living. And I ended up in Vietnam, and I decided, you know what, another great like grounding thing I started to explore more with physical exercise and breathing, yoga. And I remember I'd always wanted to get into yoga. I would try yoga, but feel really intimidated. Just like you said like earlier in another episode of like, oh, it's the teacher that sucks. Like, but it's not the teacher that sucks. It's that you don't know how to sit with yourself, and you don't know how to like breathe with your body movements and like feel grounded. And I'm a highly anxious person, and that's exactly what I needed. And so then I started to get into yoga, and I started to transition out of that high intensity interval, and I like moved into that. Um, and those were the things that really like started to shift a lot. I went from like the journaling to the physical exercise to the breathing, and then to the full on grounding with yoga. I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of went in a whirlwind there.
No, not at all. Like, that was really interesting to hear. I guess out of all of those things that you say you were doing, like, what was the one thing that you would say helped you the most out of all of those different things that you were trying at the time when you were moving from Bali, Australia to Vietnam? That you've covered quite a lot of things that you worked on, but what was the one
Yeah.
thing that you think was like really good for you?
To be honest, I don't know if I could pick one. I think that they each did what they needed at a particular pocket of time. Like right now, I don't really journal, but I
Yeah.
still heavily lean into yoga and breathing. I do a different style. I do square breathing or coherent breathing. It's a little bit more gentle. And then yoga really gives me that physical like grounding, but also like physical body movement. I would say maybe those two. And if you want to combine it, then yoga. And I'm not talking like vinyasa yoga where you're doing like power yoga. I'm talking about true hatha. You're slowly moving through the poses. You're moving with your breath. You're figuring out how to do that breathing. You're holding poses, which that's like the intensive exercise part. But that's the part people hate the most, is because you have to like stay in that pose, and it's very difficult mentally and physically. And I would say, yeah, that's probably what I would say is been the most effective for me. Um, and then I got depressed. I had another depressive episode in Vietnam, but that was, I would say, the yoga. Like I knew I was doing all the right things, right? My body, like mentally, physically, all of that. I had actually developed a gut issue. I became gluten intolerant and dairy intolerant just because my diet had changed so much from living in Asia. And when I would eat gluten or dairy, I would get really, really sick. Now, mind you, I didn't put two and two together for a while because it wasn't like I was vomiting or anything like that. But you could see after a few months, like you look at old pictures and stuff, I was very gaunt in my face because I was frequently not having the right types of poops and things like that. And my sleep was messed up because of it. My stomach was messed up because of it. Which, if you don't know, 90% of your serotonin is produced in the gut. So if you're having gut issues, it's definitely going to affect your mental health issues, and vice versa. If you're having mental health issues, it can mess up your gut. It took a minute for me to figure out what was going on, but once I started to cut out gluten and dairy, I was back to, and that was like an outside factor. It wasn't like, you know, something with my family had happened or whatever. It hit me like a brick wall again. I was depressed. I didn't have intrusive suicidal thoughts or anything at that time. And I was able to figure out the behavioral, the diet change I needed to help, but it was rough. And I leaned in again to community and like my normal coping mechanisms to help.
Yeah. I can relate to a few things you said there. Just one, that I think sometimes when you're doing lots of different things to help yourself, they're not all going to resonate with you at all the time. Like you're going to dip into the ones that you need at a specific moment in time. And I think it's important to recognize that, because sometimes people will try and do all of the things to make themselves feel better, but actually they don't really achieve anything because they're not necessarily focusing on one specific thing. So I think it's important to recognize that not everything is going to be right for you, and not everything is going to help you all the time. And as you evolve, the things that you need are going to evolve as well. And the second thing was, did you feel like when you went through that depressive episode, did you feel like that was a massive setback to where you had been, because you were feeling like pretty okay, and then you were doing all of the work? Did you feel like that was a setback, or did you use that as an opportunity to develop even more?
Yeah, no, to be honest, when I think about that time period, I felt like I didn't understand why it was happening. I was confused, but I didn't feel like it was a total setback. I was like, maybe this is just right on cue with, like, I've been doing a lot of deep diving. Maybe this is just bringing up a lot of stuff and I need to figure out how to manage this. Also, I was in a very big transition of my life in terms of I was in Vietnam and I was trying to start online work. And so I was like really pushing to like figure out how can I make money online, because I needed money to keep traveling. And I wasn't quite ready to go back to the US, and I wasn't really sure what it was I was trying to do, create or whatever. And so I didn't know if I was just getting stuck in this like mental gap. And it kind of made sense, but it was just too intensive for whatever it was that I was experiencing. Um, I was quite upset when I figured out that it was gluten and dairy, that I could no longer have my beer and cheese. And like I was very upset about that. And it took a while for me to accept it. And once I did, it took a while for my gut to heal and for my mood to bounce back. And again, I continued at least this point, I had already developed really solid, healthy routines and habits around my diet, now exercise, breath work. And if I needed to, I could lean into journaling as needed. And so I had all of those things. I had a decent community. And so I just leaned into all of that and then threw myself into work. And that's what I focused on, because I just in the moment, there was nothing that I could do just to like let it heal and pass. When I came out of it, I realized though I was like, oh wow, like that was an experience that was it's hard. It like creeps up on you. It's not like you get slapped in the face with it and you're like, oh, what just happened? It's like this very slow, insidious thing. And then it takes a while in the opposite direction to level out again. And when you come out of it, you kind of have that clarity. But after I came out of it and I was in a relationship, although good person, just ended up not being my person who I needed to be with. When I left, I was leaving him and his whole community, the community that I had built. It was really hard. You remember this. You were a part of a lot of these conversations of me being like, I don't know what I'm going to do, and like processing like the breakup before it actually happened. And I came back to the US because I was going to transition from Asia to Latin America, and I had to go back for a wedding. And my first week back, I was miserable. I was crying, sobbing, the whole thing. I didn't think I was depressed or anything like that, but I was just experiencing a breakup. And then shortly after that, I had this like sense of relief that I was like, I've worked so hard on myself all these last couple of years, and I've had these experiences, but I felt finally physically better and like in a good place, especially with this relationship ending and knowing where I was going next. I felt like the description I gave was I felt like I was finally coming home to myself. And it was just this like, when you breathe really like crisp air and you're like, I don't know how to describe it, breathing crisp air, and everything feels light and sunshiny and like free. That's how it felt. And I was like, yeah, like I'm ready for whatever's next. And then say la vie from there. So
That's a great metaphor. I think that's a really nice way to describe it. And the way that you've just described your entire journey has been really amazing, because I feel like I've been transported through all of the phases of your life, which has been really great to understand, like where you were, where you are now. So thank you for sharing all of that. That was really, really great. And you've obviously gone through so many different experiences. Where would you say you are right now with your mental health journey? Like, how are you feeling at this moment?
Oh gosh, we're right back in it, aren't we? So I was doing really well for quite some time, and then big transitions, right? So I had moved to Colombia. For the record, Colombia is amazing. Loved it. Was having a wonderful time. I was in a very good spot. I ended up getting together with a very old friend of mine who I've known for 20 years, and we started dating. And turns out he's my person, and I'm all, stupidly in love and all of that. He was in Colombia with me for a little bit, but his work is tied to the US. And so to really give this relationship a try, I was like, look, I will come back to the US and we'll give it a go. We'll get an apartment, we'll do the thing. But it's a totally new experience. So I was, we were going to give this a go, and I was going to be coming back to the US, which was a big transition for me because I've been enjoying living outside of the country for the last 6 years. And I said to him, I'm like, look, I'm going to still travel. Like we might have an apartment, but I'm still going to go. It's just that home base is going to be here for me. And, at that time, so this is a big transition, right? I'm closing a chapter of living abroad for now and moving in with a partner. I've never moved in with a partner before in our own space. And it just so happens at that time, things started to happen with my mom where she got very, very sick, as in like I had plans to move. I got off the plane. This was last June, was getting off the plane. She got sick. I went straight to the hospital. I was in the hospital with her for close to 30 days, and then she passed. So also very reminiscent situation. It was a combination of cancer and liver failure because of her drinking. And so it was like big transition, plus now the loss of another parent with a lot of like unclosed things in that relationship and all of that. And so, yeah, it was a shit show coming home basically. And for the record, I've never lived in Chicago. So like Chicago's like a whole new city for me. I left the burbs of Illinois when I was 17 and went out to another state. And then from there, that's when I went abroad. And so this is my first time back in the city. So I don't have a community here. I don't have anybody really here. The few high school friends, they're all elsewhere. And so I would say the last 6 months of last year really sucked. It was not the transition, and I was really excited about it. I came into it like with open arms, open heart of like, yes, let's give this a go. I'll say like my boyfriend, he has been fantastic. He's been an amazing support. His family's been an amazing support. But yeah, so I got thrown right back into, and it like, I think you said this in another episode where when bad things happen, they all happen at once. Right. And so I feel like this was the universe being like, all the shit that you had to deal with growing up that you've been able to process and manage on your own. Let's see how much you've really processed and dealt with it. Like, here you go. And it was messy and it was not good, with my family, with my mom passing. And so yeah, so the 6 months of last year, the last 6 months of last year were a lot of grieving. I was probably in a moderate depressive episode again. And I was just trying to get through it. And then, leaning back into my habits fell off, and I was just trying to like maintain and manage. Very lucky that a very good friend of mine who I met in Vietnam, she's come to stay with us. And so she's been living here with me and my boyfriend. And so I've had my own little in-house community, which has made it easier to cope and deal with things. And she works from home as well. So I've had like a co-working buddy. And then of course I threw myself back into work. And so I would say around New Year's is when I finally started to kind of come out of the cloud. I still have my moments. I'm still freshly grieving things, but because I've done a lot of work on myself, I'm not depressed. I am a bit anxious because there's a lot of right? I need to build a community. I have had a lot going on with work and still with the grieving stuff and lots of new changes to navigate in a relationship and all that. So I'm trying to manage my anxiety a bit more on a regular basis. I need to get back. I've been doing yoga, but not as consistently as I could be. I've been doing breathing, but not as consistently as I could be. And so I'm focused right now on getting back into my habits and routines to kind of help stabilize and ground. But I've just been letting myself have the grieving and experience because I was in it again. So now I'm finally kind of coming out of it to be like, all right, how can I move forward in a healthy, adjusted way?
Yeah, I think that's obviously a prime example of the fact that healing isn't a linear journey. There's not going to be like you do the work and then it's done. No, like life still happens around you. Things are still going to happen. Anxieties are still going to present, and it's all about how you're having that toolbox of things there to help you cope as and when things like this present to you. Because unfortunately, that's just how life works. It is hard.
Yeah.
Would you say you've got any of things in your toolbox that you're pulling out at the moment, like any products, services, or apps that you're kind of going back to help you get through some of the things that you're experiencing at the minute?
Yeah. So a couple of different things. I've actually returned to whimhoff breathing. Um, Partially because I'm preparing to go to Peru and do some hiking. So like breath work can really help with that. But I either lean into Wim Hof breathing, and he has an app for that that you can use, or I do like square breathing, which I'm sure there are apps for it, but because it's just a really simplistic breathing practice, I just do that on my own. I continue to lean into my favorite yoga app, which is Down Dog. So there's all different kinds of yoga that you can do on it. And they have other things too. They've got like Down Dog Pilates, Down Dog Bar, or whatever. They've got a couple different ones, but I do the yoga one. And like they've got vinyasa, they've got true hatha, which is the one that I was talking about, where it's like movements with your breath and holding the position a little bit, and yin yoga and a bunch of other, breath work and anything else. I think they even got meditation on there. So the Down Dog app I use. And then I particularly really like, there's some really good like grief meditations on Insight Timer. That app is actually free. You can pay to have like the courses and like the pro version, but what I really like about it is that there are thousands and thousands of meditations and breathwork options totally free. And it's really, really nice. And so I lean into a couple of meditations there. And then, to be honest, I've just been trying to get myself out into sunshine once a day and walking, even when it's cold and it's not great because, Chicago can have a little bit of a winter. But yeah, trying to be outdoors walking. And if it's just in the city or if I go out to a trail or something, that's what I've been focused on. So that's what I've been leaning into.
That makes sense. And if you had one tip for someone that was kind of starting out on their wellbeing journey out of all of those things that you've tried, like what would your tip be?
I would say my number one tip would be to try baby steps and give yourself grace in the process. I think that's like the hardest thing. You can know what you need to do, but if you're starting from like a low level because you're struggling with depression and anxiety, it can be really hard to just like pick up and do it, right? And then to get into a habit of it, that can be really, really hard. I think start with the basics, right? If we do know body movement is really helpful for mood and managing emotions and your physical and mental well-being. But maybe going to the gym is too much for you. It was for me. I was terrified to go to the gym. It gave me too much anxiety. And so if it means just doing some low intensity exercises at home, can you dedicate 15 minutes to doing it? And then slowly trying to move yourself up. And if you miss a day, you miss two, cool, that's fine. Give yourself grace, then try again. And just keep putting in the effort to you because you deserve it. Like, you deserve the love, the care, you deserve to be valued. And it's going to start with you showing that to yourself first, even when you're having a hard time. So lean into taking care of you and give yourself grace when it doesn't go perfectly or you don't do it at 100%, just small baby steps and gentle approach the whole way. That's my recommendation. It'll evolve over time. Next thing you know, you'll be that yoga stud that you want to be, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it really is just taking it one step at a time, and feeling into like what is right for you, what isn't right for you, because like we say, it's different for everybody. Not everyone's going to find the same things helpful. But I really appreciate you sharing that, and appreciate you sharing your full story with us. Is there anything else before we close that you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I just appreciate people listening. Know that life is kind of full of bullshit. One of my mottos, which is actually my first tattoo, it's all based on symbols and shapes, is that the only thing that's constant in life is change. And so you just have to remain strong, keep moving forward, and find balance in it all. The end of the day, that's all you can do. And it's about focusing on what's within your control. And I'm just hoping that my story shows people things happen, life can suck, and it can be hard. And you're entitled to having those hard moments and those emotions. But there's also a lot of beautiful things in life. There are a lot of amazing things that you can experience and you can make happen for yourself, and to just not forget that.
Yeah,
and that you deserve it.
I think one of the things, just to close before we close, one of the things you just said there, like the only thing that's constant in life is change. I think one of the things that happens a lot is that people try to resist that change and can't accept and get over, not, we don't need to go over it, but accept the change is happening. And I think that's where quite a lot of the issues that we struggle with within ourselves comes from. And if you can find ways to learn how to accept change and overcome change. I remember being 21 years old, and I remember saying, I hate change, like I hate it when things change.
Yeah.
And now in my life, I'm in a new different place like every day, and like I'm like, so I actually thrive in change. Like that is where I feel the most comfortable now, because I've made it my comfort zone. I've made being uncomfortable comfortable. So I feel like if anybody can take one thing away from that, it's that if you can accept it, and like you can find the things and the habits and the behaviors that we've spoken about in this episode and past episodes to make those changes, you're gonna have an easier life. Basically, it's gonna feel better for you. But thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate that. And thanks to everybody today for listening to our episode. If this did resonate with you, be sure to give us a like, and we would love to hear your feedback in the comments about what topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on socials, and join the community at timeisnothealer.com. All the details can be found in the episode description below. Remember, until next time, you've got this.